Unfortunately, the media is not always that kind to us, to caves, caving, and particularly cavers. And Dave Rose is a caver and journalist. And Dave has got his own opinions about media situation, media problems. And without going into any more myself, I will pass over to Dave Rose.
Before I get going, let me just do a little straw poll. Is everybody here a caver? Is there anybody here who is not a caver? Okay, so almost everybody is. Now, you know how sometimes market research firms, they phone you up and they say, on a scale of 1 to 10, do you like the way that we dealt with your complaint or with your attempt to get a new mortgage or whatever it was? Now, if having very little trust in journalists is 0 and having complete trust in them is 10, how many people here would be at the lower end of the spectrum, having not very much trust? Any journalist, generally speaking. Well, okay, and how many would tend towards the upper end? Yes, well, that's unfortunate, because I've been a journalist for 36 years. So you can safely disregard everything I say, because it's obviously going to be absolute rubbish. Unfortunately, all you're doing is reflecting what opinion surveys tend to show these days on both sides of the Atlantic. The standing of journalists, for reasons that I find baffling, is not at an all-time high. I personally got into caving because I was taken on a trip down Swildens when I was 10 years old with a youth group. But very rapidly, I became inspired by the films of Sid Peru, some of which were shown this morning. Some of you will have been here for that. And I remember very vividly watching films like his Lost River of Gaping Gill, his film about exploring the Pier Saint-Martin when I was a teenager, and they absolutely inspired me. And these were programs shown on primetime BBC television. And unfortunately, that just isn't happening anymore. Last week at the Kendal Mountain Festival, a superb new film about the Areo Caves project, the exploration of caves on the Areo Plateau in northern Spain, in which I've played something of a role for on and off for 37 years, won the People's Choice Award. And it's a magnificent film, but I've been talking to its producer and director, Paul Diffley, trying to see if we can get a primetime TV distribution deal, and so far there's not much progress. Now, as cavers, I'm sure that we're all very familiar with being asked questions when we get introduced to people and they discover we're cavers. And, is it dark down there? Why do you like squeezing through tiny spaces? That's often followed with, are you claustrophobic? Do you get claustrophobia? Do you leave string? How do you breathe down there? Is there any air? How do you stop getting lost? Have you ever been stuck? And isn't it irresponsible relying on the RAF, the police, the fire brigade, whoever, to rescue you? And of course, the kinds of impressions that lead to those questions are largely formed by the media. But there is one question I suspect few of us get asked. It's that one. And yet, if you look at the way caving is represented in the media, at least in America, I find it surprising we're not. This is the cover of a book which some of you may have read, and I think it's one of the most sensational, in the bad sense, books about caving ever written. It covers the exploration of the San Agustin system in Mexico and the penetration of the sumps where, tragically, Ian Rolland was killed in 1994. Although 2 cavers are listed as the lead authors, it was actually written by the third person, Monty Poulsen, who was not a caver. And at one point, you can tell he's not a caver, because at one point he talks about Barbara Amende having problem with the wick, unquote, of her carbide lamp. So this is what happens in the book. They've just got through this very long, deep, and dangerous sump, and they've set up an underground camp, planning to push for several days in this extraordinary system. And so Bill, as you would, offered Barbara a back rub. Sure, she said, rolling over in her sleeping bag. You can read it. I should have given a warning that... I hope there's no children here, are there? No. We might be able to set some sort of depth record right here. Well, perhaps they do hold that record. I have heard it on good authority that Bill is a big shaft man. Here's another ridiculous This, I think, is possibly the worst book on caving ever written. Blind Ascent by James Tabor. And this is about the supposed competition. I think it's probably news to all the participants, between the explorers of the Cheve system in Mexico, who, of course, are mainly Americans, and the Russian-Ukrainian team that explored Krubera, which until just a couple of months ago, was the world's deepest cave. And it's described, as you can see on the cover, by the Washington Post, no less, as a big thumping man book. What is a big thumping man book? Well, it's a book that emphasizes the erotic side of caving. Plastic ground sheets did a good job of protecting sleeping bags' abrasion, but they had their drawbacks when it came to romancing on the stone. The distinctive crinkle-crinkle sound they made impossible to ignore was Cheve's equivalent of creaking bed springs. Though that kind of noise was unavoidable, participants did try to preserve some decorum by keeping the moaning and screaming down. Now, I've been on a few underground camps, and this is news to me. My hunch is that the guy who wrote that has never been caving either. But Bill Stone, of course, played a big part in the Cheve explorations. And when he got to Camp 3 in Cheve, he got lucky because Andy Hunter, who's described elsewhere in the book as a truly cute Texan blonde and various other sexist terms, she found that Stone had cleared a double space for her in his camping area. He had a sleeping bag all laid out on hot soup waiting. Ah, bless. It marked the beginning of her relationship with Bill Stone. I think somebody's got confused with Hollywood, but I don't want to cast aspersions on Bill Stone, who's done many extraordinary things. But from these books, he does sound like the Harvey Weinstein of speleology. But it's not just these books. Here's The New Yorker, one of the poshest magazines in the world. And it's another big article about actually exploring part of the Cheve system from about 3 years ago. And again, it goes on and on about sex. And it talks about how when you come out from a long underground camp, the smell of the outdoors can lift your spirits because it held the promise of dry clothes, hot coffee, black humor, and noisy sex. Well, unfortunately, the media, it's hard to believe, does sometimes get it wrong about caving. Here is the Daily Telegraph from the 9th of November 2011, reporting the discovery of, the connection of Knott's Pot and Lost Johns, creating the three-county system, one of the more remarkable achievements of British caving over the last few years. And, it's positive, and there's a nice picture there of Boxhead Pot, and all looks good, but let's look at the small print. Well, it's true that for 25 years, potholers have been striving to join up the separate cave systems of Boxhead and Pot and Knott's Pot. Well, we can forgive that bit. Recently, a team harnessed the power of natural underground water sources to blast away mud and rock that was blocking a passage between the systems. Working 300 feet beneath the surface, beneath the M62 and A66 roads, the team joined a network of passages by channeling water through a hose. Wow! Now, I don't know how good your geography is of the road network of Northern England, but the A66 is some way from the M62, and neither are anywhere near the three counties system. But look, this is the big one. So there's the we can use the laser pointing now. Except we can't. So right up on the top corner there is the A66, and then you can see the M62 between Leeds and Manchester. And that's actually where the three counties system is, as you probably all know, mostly around the edge of the mountain known as Gregareth. Recently, there was another article, which I'm going to show in a minute, in the Sunday Times about British caving, and it mentioned the three counties system. And a survey from the new Tony Waltham superb volume of the caves and cast of the Yorkshire Dales was sent to the journalist who was writing this. And he said, I don't get it. You say this is a 90-kilometre network, but this scale on this map is only 2 kilometres. It can't be right. And he obviously expected, he'd read his clippings, and he expected it to join the M62 and the A66, and he was very disappointed. Anyway, what about that pressure hose? I actually went digging with the guys in Knott's Pot and Lost Johns. And this is actually a picture which is a bit more like it. I think that's Hugh St. Lawrence in the Bruno Kransky's Rising Sump section of Knots 2. But this is what the Daily Telegraph also wrote. In the difficult conditions 300 feet below, the team experienced 10 bars of atmospheric pressure as they channeled. Where did that come from? Now, obviously, being a journalist, I'm very keen on publicizing my own efforts. So I actually did manage to write an article in the Mail on Sunday magazine about the three counties system. And it was actually quite a long piece with some super photographs by Robbie Schoen, many of you will know him. And generally speaking, I think it was quite positive. Anyway, I wrote the article and it was all going to be laid out, and I think I went off caving somewhere. And while I was away, Tim Allen, who had helped a great deal, and indeed his photograph there, had an unpleasant experience. This is an article he wrote after the connection of the caves in Descent, entitled The Three Counties Media Circus. And here's a bit which described what happened. He described how I went up and stayed at the Martin Arms and with Robbie went caving down both ends of the system. He kindly said the story was well balanced. Becca supplied the survey. Then I received a phone call from the editor's young researcher. The editor wants to know more about the people who have died in the system. He wants names and locations so they can be matched up with the survey. A cold shiver went down my spine as I envisaged cavers swept away to their death by floodwaters here, drowned there, fell to their death here, crushed by boulders there. And in fact, the person who phoned him up said that they thought we could interview victims of people who died in the system. I mean, I had nothing to do with this. Fortunately, I was able to put a stop to it, but it is an illustration of how even if you've got somebody inside, things can go wrong. Now, things go wrong nowhere so much as when you have a big rescue. 3 years ago was the extraordinary rescue of Johann Westhauser from deep inside the Riesending system in Germany, the huge cave that connects the Austrian and German sides of the Untersberg mountain near Berchtesgaden. And Johann was hit by either a lump of mud or a rock, no one's quite sure which, deep in the caves, 2 or 3 kilometers, possibly slightly more from the entrance, and over 1,000 meters down. So this is the BBC website's report. Literally inch by inch through the most difficult conditions in Germany's deepest cave. The limits of human tolerance of heights and the tightest of confined spaces are being tested. At one stage, he was winched up through a cavern 300 meters high. Laborious stop-start progress to the surface via a series of 5 rest stations or bivouacs. What, in the middle of a pit? 5 bivouacs? To give him medical care. Now, I began to get quite worried about this because I'm actually writing a book at the moment called The World Beneath the World, which will be published by a mainstream publisher, Penguin. And the idea is to try to explain to people who are not necessarily cavers why caving is an extraordinary, absorbing, and rich activity that can absorb people's time for many decades, including my own. And I want to have a chapter on rescue, and of course, Riesending is an extraordinary story. So I decided to go down Riesending and see what it was like. And then I read the Daily Mail, and a labyrinth of tiny crevices. I began to get quite worried, because as you can see, I'm 6'3" tall, and I've got about a 47-inch chest, and I was thinking, I'll never get down this. And I was in touch with Ulrich Meyer, Uli, one of the cave's main explorers, who part of a small team that's pushed a lot of that cave. And I was sending him emails saying, I keep reading that it's really, really narrow, and I won't get through it. And he said, no, you'll be fine, it's not an issue. And then I read that you needed foam to be sprayed onto you, and to tranquilized to keep him calm. This was poor old Johann again. And then apparently there are 5 shafts measuring 200 feet each, only a few centimeters between him and the dripping rock. And I thought, Jesus, maybe this isn't such a good idea. So I thought, well, maybe the pictures are like this. Oh, actually, that's quite big, isn't it? That's sort of quite spacious. In fact, that is the chamber where Johann was injured. That's somebody climbing the pitch where he was just clipping onto the rope when he got hit. Anyway, I liked it so much when I went down Riesending that I actually went down it twice. The first time mainly to retrace the route of the rescue and to interview people who played a leading part in that. And that was in July. And what I discovered is that far from being a labyrinth of tiny crevices, well, I've got one of those Petzl Transporter 45-litre sort of rucksack-style tackle bags. And, obviously I had it dangling when I was on the pitches, but on the horizontal stuff, I think I only had to take it off my back twice because the passages are so spacious. And I do believe there were 2 places where I had to turn sideways, but it wasn't worse than that. Anyway, I went back again in October with Mad Phil, and we pushed with Uli and with Florian Schwarz, another of the key people, a stream passage that hadn't been completed because it had been too wet on previous visits. Anyway, there we are. We've reached the sump at 1,149 meters. And as you can see, we're having quite a nice time, really. We had a nice 6-day camping trip. And the only thing was, I didn't hear any sleeping mats crinkling at any stage during that stay. And as far as I'm aware, I mean, I can tell you that, Phil and I did not have sex, and I don't think Uli and Florian did either. But you can see how mistakes get made, because after all, as the Australian newspaper put it, it's always pitch black in the Riesending, with just the lights on cavers' helmets for the illumination, sometimes obscured by fog. The fog of war, or at least in this case of bad journalism. But sometimes really bad journalism gets closer to home. And here you have a report from that excellent journal of record, the Somerset Mercury, from last summer, about a rescue from a really terrifying place, a cave so dangerous that although the cave was apparently only 50 meters from the entrance, you needed fire crews from Weston-super-Mare, Blagdon, and crews from Devon and other places in Somerset, Barnstable, Chatter, Bridgewater and Wells. Apparently there were 12 fire engines attending this rescue, though of course the fire brigade didn't do any of the actual rescue. It was all done by the Mendip Rescue Organisation. They closed off the road, and there's a whole other story about how that happened. But what was this fearsome abyss? Well, I'm going to show you 2 very brave explorers, even further into the cave than 50 meters from the entrance. Yes, it's taken some years ago. It's my son Jacob on the right, and his friend Will. And the cave, of course, is Goat Church Cavern. Very, very, very scary place. Almost as scary as the kind of places that Tabor wrote about in Blind Descent. Super caves. They present more hazards than any other extreme exploration environment. Just ascending into and climbing out of them is exorbitantly dangerous. Yes. But even worse than the physical dangers, inner dangers as well, warping the mind with claustrophobia, anxiety, insomnia, hallucinations, personality disorders. Perhaps we all have to have a personality disorder to go caving. There is also a particularly insidious derangement unique to caves called the rapture, which is like a panic attack on meth. It can strike anywhere in a cave at any time, but usually assaults a caver deep underground. Oh, I hope I never have that. Well, it's no wonder that, as that very posh paper, The New Yorker, put it, "Welcome to hell," one of the cavers told me when I joined him by the campfire that first night. This is the base camp for this Cheve trip. "Where happiness goes to die," another added. There was a pause, then someone launched into the Colonel's monologue from Avatar. "Out there beyond that fence, every living thing that crawls, flies, or squats in the mud wants to kill you and eat your eyes for jujubes. If you wish to survive, you need to cultivate a strong mental attitude." Well, you certainly do. Now, one thing that is an overwhelming lesson from this, and if you read this article, which you'll find on the New Yorker website, if you just put Cheve, cave, in New Yorker, you'll find it. And actually, some of it is quite funny. The guy who wrote it did not go beyond the entrance. He did, to be fair, go as far as the entrance, but he didn't go any further. But that's, I suppose, why he was able to write paragraphs like this. And there you see the quote at the end. "A good caver is one who forgets how bad it really is." Now, no wonder with stuff like this that caving does have a somewhat negative image, and especially whether we get asked these silly questions. No wonder, especially since you don't have things like Sid Peru's films being shown on primetime anymore. Some of us, here's another effort from myself, do try to counter it. This is an article in the Sunday Times magazine that I got published about the Ario caves in the spring of this year. But even then, you can see that the editors can't resist, that amping up dangerous obsession. There is a lot of positive stuff in that article, but it still has to be cast in that negative frame. But then, actually, sometimes articles appear which are also more positive. Now, this is a very recent piece from the Sunday Times again. And I know that the people who dealt with this reporter found him slightly trying, because I think he made something like 100 phone calls before writing the article, and he kept asking more and more questions. But actually, at the end of it, it's quite a positive piece. It's illustrated with a superb photo taken by Mark Berkey, the photo which also won the People's Choice Award for photos at the Kendal Mountain Festival. So if you do take the time and trouble, the thing is, although journalists do write a lot of rubbish, if you tell them stuff that's not rubbish, they will listen and they will start to print it. And if you do make the effort, even though it might be at times a little bit frustrating, sometimes the results will be worth it. And I think a piece like this actually does do a great deal of good. The only quibble I'd have with this piece right now is that when he first phoned Andy Evis and Tim Allen, he promised he'd mention this occasion at the RGS and to give it some publicity, and unaccountably that has been cut. Now, the thing is, I've talked about journalists who don't go caving mainly, and the criticisms I've made are of people who've never been down a cave, and this looks like it might be something similar. This is an article from the Daily Mail from some time ago, a Saturday spread, about a chap who actually did go down a cave. And if you look at the beginning of it, it's the sort of thing that you've learned to expect. Of course I'm scared, I'm absolutely terrified with nothing but a head torch to ward off the darkness, tunnel barely 2 foot high, etc. But here's the thing. Caves are actually extraordinary places. And if you do actually get someone to go down them who hasn't been before, they may not be totally immune for it, because this is how he ends his piece. It is a truly awe-inspiring place, made even more magical by the fact that almost nobody has ever been here. Since the conquest of Everest in 1953, more than 1,500 people have jostled for space on the world's highest summit. In the stretching eons of geological time, however, fewer than 50 have ever set foot within these walls. This, I guess, is the payment cavers take in exchange for the diving and the digging, the pain and the risks. Now I think I finally understand this odd pastime with its unique blend of extreme sport, civil engineering, exploration and scientific endeavour. Here's another example. It's also actually from the Daily Mail. Jane Fryer. And I've got to say this. She was not a caver. I think this is probably her first caving trip. Fair play to her. She went down Titan. She abseiled down the main shaft of Titan and prussicked out again, which you have to say is quite impressive. You might also say it's crazy, and indeed, she started her article like this. This is madness, absolute bloody madness. Who in their right mind would step out over a vertical drop into the pitch dark with just a rope and a teeny metal peg to hold them? Oh yes, and the rope is thinner than my little finger. You must have a big little finger. And the floor is a stomach-churning 464 feet down, and we're already deep underground in Titan, the UK's biggest cave. But again, see how she ends her piece. And the cave opens up before me, an enormous limestone cathedral of soaring walls, glowering dark crevices, and a huge black echoing hole where the floor should be. It is absolutely staggeringly wonderfully beautiful. And while I might not have toiled in the dark every weekend for a decade to experience it, she's talking about Dave Nixon Moose digging and his chums digging it, and have absolutely no intention of looking down, I can finally see what they've been banging on about, and, elated, I wave up at them madly. So, reaching out to the community beyond caving can pay dividends, and it can help, I think, in the media to generate a more positive image. And it also helps sometimes to get on the right side of politicians. Here you see on the right the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, as he now is, with, that is David Davis, with Di. And here on the left, David Rutley, Di Middleton, and David Rutley, the MP for Macclesfield. And in the main chamber of Gaping Gill on a very wet day, December 3 years ago, with a large team of us who took them down. And they had a fantastic time. And last week at the House of Commons, Tim met David Rutley at a reception for the BMC Mendale Mountains campaign. And David Rutley said to him, you know what? He said, that thing we did 3 years ago, it's one of the best things I've ever done. It's been one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And here they are again. That's another shot. As you can see, it's quite wet. My son Daniel on the second from right. And we're all having a pretty good time. So in conclusion, I want to just get across a message here. Journalists can't publish what they don't get told. So if you have a story to tell about caving, if you have something positive to say, try and get it out there. And don't do what some people have done in the past. I've shown you those silly stories about the three-counter system with the A62 and the M66. That emerged because a news agency, Barcroft Media, handled the distribution of the photos, excellent photos, taken by Robbie Schoen, and just wrote gobbledygook. So take control by being personally involved. The media does not have an anti-caving agenda. It really doesn't. It's open to ideas, it's open to approaches, and they will probably be interested. Engage directly, rebut fake news. If people write rubbish, try and make complaints, get it corrected. Take journalists caving if you get the chance. Emphasize the positive. And I'd just like to end by saying one thing. Many of you will know me. Those who don't, you can find me very easily on ukcaving.com. I am also the BCA newsletter editor now. It's very easy to get in touch with me. If you want advice, if you think you have a story you want to get out there about caving, or you want to correct something, or you want to know how the media works, any questions you have, just get in touch. And I'll do what I can to put you in touch with the right people, to give you the right ideas. And hopefully that will see positive dividends in the years to come. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Very good.